Welcome in. This is week 7 of Run the League, and today we are doing waiver wire pickups. Massive bye weeks coming this week, so let's get prepared for it. Here we go. Okay, guys, welcome in to Run the League. I'm excited this week. This is a really tough week for everybody, including myself. There are a bunch of teams on bye. The Bills, the Cowboys, the Vikings, the Steelers, the Chargers, and the Jaguars all on bye this week. That's going to make the waiver wire extremely important. I don't know about y'all, but I was looking through my rosters, and I'm having to start some of the last guys on my bench just to throw into my lineup. So hopefully the waiver wire can help me a little bit with that, and hopefully it'll help y'all out. So let's start with the quarterback position. My top streamers this week. So, if you're looking at the teams on bye, you're talking about Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Ben Roethlisberger, Justin Herbert, and Trevor Lawrence, all on bye. So, there's some top names on that list, especially when you're talking about Josh Allen and Dak Prescott. If you only rostered one quarterback, it's going to be very important that you find a good streamer this week to help you keep that position afloat. So, the three names that I really like this week are Tua Tagovailoa against the Atlanta Falcons. He looked really, really good last week in his first game back from injury. Now, I know he was playing the Jaguars, but I wouldn't exactly call the Atlanta Falcons a great defense either. So I think Tua should have a really nice week and be a really nice option. I think he could finish inside the top 12, maybe even inside the top 10. The other quarterback that I like is playing against Tua on the other side, and that's Matt Ryan. They're coming off a bye week. They get Calvin Ridley back. We saw the emergence of Kyle Pitts last week. We know all about Cordero Patterson, the kind of year that he's having. So I think Matt Ryan's going to have a really nice week against a really, really bad Dolphins defense. And then finally, the last streamer I like is Derek Carr, taking on the Philadelphia Eagles this week. Carr got back on track last week, which was a huge surprise for me. Honestly, I thought when they lost John Gruden that they would take a step back, and honestly, the Raiders might have played their best game of the entire season. So I think Derek Carr could be a guy that really continues his great season in the coming weeks. Moving on to the running back position, obviously this is the position that most times is the most important when you go on the waiver wire. The top pickup this week, I think for most people, is going to be Dearness Johnson, the running back for the Cleveland Browns. Kareem Hunt, probably going to be out at least 3 weeks. I assume he's going to go to the IR, but I think it could be longer than that. He has a calf injury. There's a big problem there for the Browns. And then you also got to think Nick Chubb didn't play last week. And since they play on Thursday, he's probably not going to play this week. In fact, reports this morning said he's unlikely to play. Usually when you get that report on a Tuesday, you're probably not going to play on a Thursday. So I think Dearness Johnson's going to be a guy who comes in, probably is going to be a top 20 running back this week. So it's just a matter of how much do you want to spend on a 1 week rental. Now, the interesting part about this whole situation is nobody's really talking about the other running back in the Cleveland Browns room, which is Demetric Felton. Now, the reason why I think this is an interesting argument you kind of have to have with yourself is I think Dearness Johnson will be the top running back for the Browns this week. But in the future, I would say Kareem Hunt's biggest role is in the pass game, and that's where Demetric Felton might actually plug into that role even better than Johnson. So I don't really know where I'm at quite yet as far as how much more I'm willing to spend on one over the other. I think Dearness Johnson gives you a chance to win this week, so you have to pay like that. You're going to have to pay probably $15 fab dollars if you want to add him to your roster. As far as Felton goes, you might be able to sneak by and get him for $10, and he could be the one who has longer value throughout the next few weeks while Kareem Hunt is out. So for me, I'm actually prioritizing Felton a little bit more, especially if we hear good reports about Chubb, maybe saying, he's going to be out this week, but will for sure be back next week. It makes it much safer to go that route. But if you're looking for a true potential workhorse, if Chubb and Hunt are out for extended times, then Johnson is your guy. Next on my list at the running back position, I like to get sneaky at the position from time to time and kind of look ahead into the future. And so two guys that you're kind of going to have to be doing that with are Marlon Mack and Ronald Jones. Reports continue to come out that both guys are potentially being traded. I know teams have inquired about Marlon Mack, specifically the Kansas City Chiefs. I've even heard the Cleveland Browns have been looking at him as well. As far as Ronald Jones goes, that's more of kind of a wait-and-see approach. And I think the reason for that is that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think, still like Ronald Jones. The problem is they just can't get him on the field because Leonard Fournette's become their top option at the running back position, and Gio Bernard is their pass catcher. So it's just, does he have a role, and are the Bucs willing to get rid of him? I don't know the answer to that. Because I think for the Buccaneers, they're trying to win a championship this year, and if Fournette does get hurt, they're going to need Ronald Jones. So I think it's just a matter of what you believe and kind of looking ahead. Now, the trade deadline's in a couple weeks, so there's a chance he could be traded in the next 2 weeks. If he goes somewhere good, Ronald Jones could have some major value to end the season. Next pickup that I really like, and again, it's kind of looking ahead, but it's more taking advantage of the situation. So last week, late in the week before the game started, I went in and picked up Rashad Penny off waiver wires. I got him for free, and the reason for it was Chris Carson went to the IR. So he's going to be out at least 2 more weeks, but the neck injury, I mean, it could be longer than that. We saw Alex Collins play really well against the Steelers, 15 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown, but then he left the game with an injury. So there's a chance Rashad Penny could be the starting running back for the Seattle Seahawks this week. Pete Carroll said he looked good. They're ready to get him going full speed, 100%. So they're going to let him go out there and really test the injury that he had earlier this year. And I think Penny could be a guy that's kind of sneaky late in the season. A couple more running backs I like. I think another really popular waiver wire pickup this week is probably going to be Ramondre Stevenson. He clearly has a role now with the New England Patriots. He had the fumbles early in the season. Bill Belichick does not like that, pulled him out, did not play him for a while in there. Now he's back. He made a statement last week, caught 3 passes. That's something we haven't really seen much of from Damien Harris. So I think he fills in a role in that regard. And I also think he's a big body. I mean, they're going to give him the ball. They spent draft capital on him. I don't think Damien Harris is now locked in as the RB1 for the Patriots. I think it's going to be a split now. He'll have the higher percentage of the split, but I think Stevenson is definitely going to be worked in now into this backfield, even more so than we saw earlier in the season. Finally, a couple other waiver wire guys, Devontae Freeman, Kenyon Drake are 2 guys who had good weeks this week. They're deep stashes. I mean, these are the kind of guys that you're only going to pick up in 12-team leagues, in my opinion. I don't really know what to expect week by week with both. I like Drake a little bit more just because the Ravens backfield is it's so crowded right now. And that's a problem. I mean, Latavius Murray, Freeman, Tyson Williams, even Le'Veon Bell scored a touchdown. I mean, who can you trust in that backfield? Makes it kind of just one of those situations where I'm only picking up Devontae Freeman if I really, really need help at the position, and probably only in deeper leagues. Drake, on the other hand, scored 2 touchdowns, didn't have many touches, was not that involved in the offense, so I need to see that progress. But if you want to take a shot, I understand that. Josh Jacobs has been hurt a lot. There's a possibility there for Drake, especially since they paid him. I would assume they'll use him more than maybe a guy like Devontae Freeman gets used in Baltimore. Also, just kind of to mention this, Michael Carter, the running back for the New York Jets, just check your waiver wire. He would probably be my number 1 ad this week if he is out there. He's not available in a ton of leagues, so just be on the lookout for him. He comes back this week. He scored a couple touchdowns in the past 2 weeks, had the bye week. Maybe after the bye week, he becomes a true workhorse running back. I'm not sure if he'll quite get to that level, but I do think he's one of those guys where he has season-long value regardless of injuries, whereas a lot of these other guys, it's basically if the guy comes back healthy, they no longer have a role. So that's why I like Carter going forward. And also J.D. McKissick, another guy who is rostered in many, many leagues, but if he is on your waiver wire, I would be very intrigued, especially with Antonio Gibson's injury. Jarrett Patterson will get a lot of the touches as well, but J.D. McKissick is going to take up all the receiving workload now for a Washington football team that is going to be playing from behind a ton this season. Moving on to the wide receiver position now. My top pickup this week at the wide receiver spot is Rashad Bateman. He had 6 targets this week for the Baltimore Ravens, and this was coming after the coaches said, hey, we're not going to push Bateman back. This was his first game back from injury. We're not going to push it. We're not going to throw the ball to him a ton. We're not going to we're not going to heavily involve him this first week. And they did. They had no choice. Sammy Watkins' injury played a part in that, but I also think the first-round draft capital, his talent in general, played a role in that. And you saw Hollywood Brown take a step back this week, and that's in large part because of Rashad Bateman and what he can do. He was a first-round draft pick for a reason and is a guy who I'm very interested in going forward. I do think the Ravens are going to throw the ball more in many of their matchups going forward, and I think Bateman could be a sneaky add, especially later on in the season. A couple other guys that I like, T.Y. Hilton. You need to check the injury report for him. He's dealing with a groin injury, or actually I think it was a quad injury after their game against the Texans this weekend, but 4 receptions, 80 yards. He looked good. Now, it was against the Houston Texans, and his nickname against them is T.Y. Houston because he has been awesome against the Texans throughout his entire career. But I would just say I think the injury is something to look at, and T.Y. looked fresh in general. Looked like a guy who was, resting throughout the year, really healthy. So we'll see what the injury report is on him, but I am willing to pick him up. I'd probably spend 5% of my fab budget to go get him. He's just a deep ball target, and it looks like Carson Wentz has really found his mojo again. 2 straight weeks he's been really, really good. In fact, he was the number 1 graded quarterback on PFF for the entire season last week against the Texans. So had a really nice performance, threw for 400 yards against the Baltimore Ravens the weekend before. So I think there's some room there for him to continue to play well, and that means T.Y. could have some very high-value targets deep down the field, especially since we know Paris Campbell is probably going to be out for a significant amount of time. A couple other guys that I have to mention, just check if they're rostered or not. Jalen Waddle, he had his breakout performance this week. I know a lot of people talked about dropping him. If he is on your waiver wire, go get him. I think he could be a top 24 wide receiver rest of season. A lot of Dolphins pass catchers are injured. Tua really likes him. You can tell they have a good connection. And in the 2 games Tua's played, Jalen Waddle has 3 touchdowns. So it's really no surprise that Tua is targeting him quite a bit, especially since they played together at Alabama. Jalen Waddle must be rostered. I would spend up for Waddle at least 30% of my fab budget for a guy like him. I think he could be a true difference maker down the stretch. Also check on Henry Ruggs, AJ Green, McCole Hardman. All of them have roles in their offense. So if you need a guy in a pinch, if you need to go add a guy who could give you some value moving forward, or if you just have an open roster spot, I think they would be pretty nice additions and could give you some big weeks, which is kind of what you're looking for in fantasy football. If you're going to play a guy who's kind of a flyer, you want to play a guy who has a very high ceiling. And those are some guys who could give you a touchdown every single week, which is a big deal. At the tight end position, there's 2 names I need to mention. Last week, I told you Hunter Henry, and I also told you Ricky Seals-Jones, and both of those guys are back on the waiver wire edition this week because they need to be added. If you're dealing with tight end issues, which a lot of people are, a lot of injuries have happened out there, these are 2 guys that I feel pretty safe with, especially this week. Ricky Seals-Jones, his value is tied to how long Logan Thomas is out. So you might only get him for a couple more weeks, but he looked really good in his first outing with the football team, and Hunter Henry caught another touchdown. The touchdown saved his week, but he's clearly involved in the offense to some extent, especially in the red zone. Okay, my defensive streamer of the week this week is the Giants versus the Carolina Panthers. I actually think both of these defenses could be really good in this matchup, but Sam Darnold has just looked terrible for the Panthers over the past few weeks. Honestly, it coincides with when Christian McCaffrey went out with injury. Since that point, he's really struggled. He's thrown two interceptions or more in the past 3 games, so just something to watch. I think the Giants could cash in there. Panthers defense should have a pretty nice performance as well. My top 3 matchups this week to target in fantasy football this week, meaning I would play a lot of the guys on these rosters just because I think there will be high point totals. I think there'll be a lot of opportunities for points and things like that moving forward. So my top 3 matchups, the Chiefs versus the Titans. Love that matchup. Both teams should score quite a few points. It'll probably be similar to the Bills versus the Titans a couple weeks, or this past weekend, which I think was very high scoring, one of those fast-paced games. All the guys who have fantasy relevance really showed up in that game. The next matchup is the Falcons versus the Dolphins. Again, much like the Dolphins versus the Jaguars, I think there'll be a lot of points here. I think every fantasy option should be pretty relevant this week. Even the Dolphins running backs. I mean, when you talk about Myles Gaskin, I think he could have a fantasy relevant week after somewhat getting benched last week. Mike Davis for the Falcons, he's been disappointing this year. I think he could fall into the end zone this week. So again, good matchups all around. And then finally, the Green Bay Packers versus the Washington football team. Tons of points available there. I think both offenses are going to have to score, especially through the air. I don't love the football team running the ball against the Packers, but I think throwing the ball could really do the trick for them. Ricky Seals-Jones, Terry McLaurin, J.D. McKissick could all have big value in this game. So those are my top 3 matchups to target this week, especially if you're playing in DFS. Those are good matchups to keep an eye on for some of those underrated guys who you could pay, just a little bit of money for and get them on your roster and have a big week, such as Jalen Waddle last week. He was cheap. You're able to get huge value out of him. Could happen again this week. So yeah, I mean, this is the waiver wire edition. This is week 7 of the fantasy football season. You have to be making strides. You have to be turning the corner. If you're 500 or 2-4, you need to be making those moves. And even if you're 6-0, you need to be making those moves to really try to get to the point where you can win your league. And that's where we're at right now. Be sure to catch our fantasy football show. That comes out on Thursdays. And, of course, Run the League, Stardom, Situm, which comes out on Wednesday. But for Grayson Grunefer, this has been Run the League on NFL on 365 Sports.